He knocked me over. I landed on the dog bowl.
This one's wife. What does she do all day? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. What does this one's wife do all day? It is a fair question. After all, she doesn't have a job. It isn't the case that she runs a business. We know that she has a staff to help with regard to cleaning those 37,000 toilets and to look after the children to the extent that you accept that they exist. And therefore, it leads to the clear question, what is it that she does all day? In order to answer that, we're able to have a decent approximation of what a day for her looks like as a consequence of understanding the way that her narcissism governs her behaviour, her attributes vis-à-vis her narcissistic traits, and what we generally know about the way that she conducts herself. Now, for most of you, your day probably consists of organising children to get off to school, making breakfast, clearing away breakfast, getting yourself to your job, doing a job all day, coming home, organising meals, organising, tidying up, making sure homework gets done if you've got children, all that type of thing that I hear from friends of mine. For some of you might be retired, and therefore your day consists of attending to some chores, perhaps meeting some friends, watching videos such as mine, watching television, reading a book, reading the newspaper, taking part in an organisation, perhaps doing some charitable work. But for most people, their days will be pretty full in terms of, essentially, their relationships, their jobs, running a home, and dealing with the day-to-day admin of life. But what of this one's wife? Well, first of all, let us consider the way that her narcissism impacts upon her. As you'll know, the engine that drives her behaviour is the pursuit of the prime aims, which means that she has to assert control over anybody that comes up on her radar. She can do so directly, indirectly, or even through withdrawal. What that means is that she will busy herself in some respects by being pleasant to some individuals who are painted white, that she will ignore or stay in a position of withdrawal from some people that are painted black. But the actual aspect of control means that in some instances she's motivated to do something, often by picking up the phone or texting. So for instance, if her PR outfit or agency pops something to her head, she's more than likely going to issue a call and start bandying around orders to them to do things. Where information comes her way about something that causes somebody to come up on her radar, if, for instance, it relates to Catherine, then she's not going to contact Catherine directly. She'll stay in a position of withdrawal, but it's likely to drive her to issue some kind of instruction to release some PR puff piece. But she has to have this control. And for her, that means she's more likely to take certain steps than normal people would do so. She also has the requirement of fuel. Now, she could go a day without dealing with people, maybe 2 or 3 days, although it would start to have an impact upon her as her fuel levels reduced. Instead, her narcissism wants her to draw fuel as often as it possibly can, which means it will compel her to have certain interactions. It means it will compel her to have interactions with Harry if he's around, that she will telephone people, that she will text people, that she will perhaps go and see certain people. It means that she is driven to have interactions, and therefore that forms part of her daily routine. Now, for some narcissists, it means that they go to work and they interact with their colleagues, which provides them with fuel. And they'll come home and they'll speak to their wife or their husband or the children, which provides them with fuel. And then they might text their friends. But this one's wife doesn't actually have a job. It's more likely to compel her to issue orders to the Archwell staff to ring them up to find out what they're doing. Where are they with this project? What are they doing in relation to this campaign? What new ideas have they got? And given her contemptuous and haughty nature, it means that her pursuit of fuel is likely to manifest with her badgering people. Remember, she's inherently lazy and she's entitled. These narcissistic attributes shape the way that she pursues the fuel. Some narcissists are industrious, some are particularly driven. But with her, she would like to sit ensconced in her own ivory tower whilst people have to come to her, that she might summon them, or that she will organise Zoom calls, which provides her with fuel, which means that it's easy for her to harass people, pester them, issue orders to them whilst they respond. She naturally needs the residual benefits that come, and once again, that will drive her behaviour. But the two chief things that drive her behaviour on a daily basis will be the necessity of control and the pursuit of fuel. Shaping the way that she goes about those two things are her narcissistic traits. Her arrogance, her sense of entitlement, her haughtiness, her lack of accountability. For her, as I've mentioned, this is less her rolling up her sleeves and really getting focused on a project and seeing it through to a conclusion, but basically flitting from one thing to another, never actually completing anything. Coming up with half-baked ideas and there being a flurry of activity as she issues instructions to the staff at Archwell. I've got this idea, look into it, do this, contact this person, I want you to get this, I want you to organise that. And she will be very much somebody that issues a whole series of orders. Undoubtedly, that deflated staff will be thinking, yep, here she goes again with a load of suggestions, which then she'll have forgotten about and nothing will happen. But just in case she does, we better get on with it and do what she says. Her sense of entitlement and lack of accountability means she's not somebody that's going to be engaging in domestic duties. She's far too grand for that. Instead, that's what the staff has to do. And there'll be occasions where she will speak pleasantly to them, acting as if she's their friend, but for the most part, she'll be dismissive and standoffish with them. After all, they are just the help, and they are beneath her. Accordingly, she will breeze through the Monty Shit Show mansion, assuming that she does live there, telling people what they ought to be doing, as she undoubtedly will wander along and uncork a bottle of wine and pour herself a glass. I can envisage that with this one's wife, she doesn't emerge until quite late in the morning. Although previously she was known for sending emails at the crack of dawn, I see that she will have shifted in that regard, because she actually has far less to do. And I think that as a consequence of potential problems in obtaining fuel, she may well be turning to alternative provisions of fuel, which could be drink and even possibly drugs, which means I anticipate, and I'll return to this in due course, that she has rather late nights. This means that she's likely to sleep in, and that if the children exist, they're attended to by Harry or the staff for organising them to go to kindergarten or school, and that she doesn't emerge until mid-morning. Not necessarily every single day, but I should anticipate that as a consequence of her sense of entitlement, her general laziness and lack of accountability, and the fact that she doesn't really have anything real to do, that's what happens. She will then undoubtedly go to her phone and be looking at what reactions are to the latest thing that she's done. This might be by way of self-serving, satisfied rictus grin to herself about the latest puff piece that has appeared, and then followed by the grinding of teeth and nearly suppressed rage that manifests as she sees reportage of, say, Catherine or William. I anticipate that she spends a reasonable amount of time just sat there, scrolling through, drawing fuel from the comments, both positive and negative about her, whilst doing little else. Again, her laziness comes to the fore, and given the petty nature of her as a middle mid-ranger, it wouldn't be a surprise if, as suspected, she does actually comment below the line. As many of you know, it's suspected that she writes as guest speaker on the New York Post's below the line commentary. And given the amount of time that she has, her need for control, her need for fuel, her need, of course, to batten down against threats to control, it would not be a surprise to find that a proportion of her day is spent hammering the keyboard, muttering to herself as she argues with people online. More evolved, more accomplished narcissists just don't have the time for that. They would move on. They would be about other matters. But for her narcissism would direct her to respond to them because, one, she's petty, and two, she has the time to do so. It might be that she'll pop out for lunch with somebody if she's able to curry up a friend from somewhere. She may have some meetings that have been organised where she will go and she'll bark orders at people as downtrodden minions, listen and make notes and make suggestions which are roundly ignored by her. But it won't be a long day for her, and then she'll be back at home. By this stage, I suspect that a bottle has been opened and she's imbibing, and that'll go on throughout the evening. There may be arguments with Harry if he's there. She will engage in some more communications via texts. She has little to do with her family, of course, so that is an area of her life where there is a gap. She doesn't have any genuine friends and doesn't have many of them either. And therefore, it seems to me that much of her time will be spent garnering fuel in an online environment. I suspect as well that she may well stay up late, fueled by potential pharmaceuticals, as it acts as a fuel substitute and she engages in yet more rage scrolling. The fact is that the pursuit of the prime aims governs her, but for certain narcissists, that governs them in a productive way. They interact with friends and family. They hold down a job, or they run a business. They engage in various projects. But she's inherently lazy, and her sense of entitlement is such that she can't really be bothered to do any of those things. Her narcissism wants to make her busy in the sense of asserting control and drawing fuel, but wants to get the maximum return with the minimum of investment. And therefore, a lot of her time will actually be spent monitoring what other people are doing. What are the general public saying about her? Is anybody famous reacting to what she's done? Rather than be productive, for instance, actually doing something with American Riviera Orchard, or, for instance, creating some decent content for use in a Lemonada podcast. Instead, she will spend a lot of her time essentially poking her nose in to try and find out what other people are up to. You might think, for instance, and I did notice that somebody had made this suggestion on a thread on the subreddit, Saint This One's Wife, they use her full name, I do not, as you know, whereby someone opined, and I forget the name of the individual, but they suggested, since she's now got an Instagram account and she's meant to be using it, surely you would expect to get a few posts a week. Now, there are some content creators who post every single day and multiple times. There are others, perhaps more famous people, who only do so a few times a week. But they do so to engage with their audience, to create interesting content which causes responses to it. And in a way, you would think for a narcissist, isn't that a no-brainer? That she could sit there with her supposedly hundreds of thousands of followers and put up some content, perhaps promoting ARO, promoting the cookery show, promoting some other ideas that she's got, in order to use social media to pursue the prime aims. Remember, that's done subconsciously. But the fact remains, many narcissists would use social media to increase their engagement because it allows them to control people through regular posting, draw fuel by way of people's comments, likes, responses, and also assist with residual benefits with regards to the potential of earning. But this one's wife, despite having shitloads of time to do all of this, doesn't. Why? It's because she's got no creativity. She has no ideas. She has no imagination. And she's lazy. She basically expects products to magically appear and for her to receive a load of money without her doing anything other than saying, let's call it American Riviera Orchard. She expects that a podcast series will just manifest and she'll be paid loads of money for it, with her doing the bare minimum of it. She just doesn't get it. And she doesn't get it because her narcissism tells her this is the way that she should behave. For many of you, it seems extraordinary. You would think to yourself, you've got lots of money in the bank, you have a staff that's making your meals, cleaning your toilets, looking after your kids to the extent you accept that they exist. You've got loads of time on your hands. You've got world fame. So you should be leveraging this, and you should be having a real good tilt at creating content. You've got it far easier than many people who start from scratch, and yet you don't. Why? And the reason is, once again, it's her narcissism. Whereas some narcissists would harness those very things that I've spoken about and improve upon them and use them towards the prime aims and greater success, she doesn't, because she's lazy. And she's distracted by criticism. She really can't handle it. It gets to her so much that rather than spend her time curating, as she would say, some interesting, meaningful content that would be of interest to her followers and possibly even wider, she gets sucked into rage scrolling, organising PR puff pieces to counter the criticisms of her, flinging crockery around by way of reaction to another criticism, crying on the floor, sobbing about how unfair it all is, berating Harry because it's his fault, arguing with people online. And that just shows that the focus of her narcissism with regard to control is being done as firefighting rather than creating. This one's wife has a lot of time on her hands, but she doesn't use it productively as a consequence of the way that her particular narcissism functions. And instead, she leads a lazy, entitled, but ultimately lonely lifestyle. Do you agree with my assessment of what her day will largely look like? Or do you think there's more to it? If so, let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.